Hello, I'm Joyce Barrett. Welcome to today's webinar. Webinars are brought to you through the generosity of Heritage Ohio supporters. We invite you to join us by visiting the website heritageohio.org. Heritage Ohio's mission is helping people to save the places that matter, build community, live better. Today's presentation is on saving your downtown with small-scale manufacturing. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you have questions, please type them into the question box at any time. We will be having a drawing. We have 9 copies of Recast Your City written by our speaker. And the contest, I'll be putting that, or Devin or I will be putting the link to the contest in the chat box, which you're welcome to check into at any time. And we'll let people know later this afternoon how that came out. Later this afternoon, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar with a link to the recording of this webinar, which you are welcome to share. Today's presenter is Ilana Preuss. Ilana is the founder and CEO of Recast City, the author of the book Recast Your City, and co-author of Discovering Your Maker Economy and Made in Place, Small-Scale Manufacturing and Neighborhood Revitalization. Through Recast City, she partners with local leaders to bring Main Street back to life, bringing businesses back to downtown, and build an inclusive and resilient economy. She's passionate about making great places and sees that small-scale product businesses are a missing piece in today's mixed-use development, commercial property repositioning, and local economic development strategy. Preuss's passion for great places grew out of her experience working with big and small cities all over the country when she led the Technical Assistance Program at the U.S. EPA Smart Growth Program and as the Vice President and Chief of Staff at Smart Growth America. Ilana, you ready to take it over?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for hosting me today. I'm excited to be here with you and everybody else online. So thank you everybody for taking the time out for this conversation. I'm going to start with a presentation, and then we'll be able to take a whole bunch of your questions. So please, as Joyce said, feel free to post your questions at any point along the way, and we'll get to all of them after the short presentation. My hope in all of this with you today is for you to come out of this knowing that not only are there small-scale manufacturers in your community, but that they can be an amazing asset for your Main Street and for your local economy to create more opportunity for more people and to create a place that everybody loves to be. So with that, we'll start with the basics, right? Good afternoon. Wonderful to be here with all of you. I always start by thinking a little bit about what does it mean to be in a place, and what are the places that we're all creating. I'm a place sort of, I don't know, a place person. That's the thing I've always focused on, right? How does place express the personality of where we are? What makes it different? What shows us about it, the people who live there, the people who work there, but also what shows us things about its history and some of the ways that it's been neglected or potentially historically excluded from funding in the past, the people and the places. When we think about our main streets and our local economic opportunity, we have to, at this point, really position ourselves in light of the pandemic that we have been going through and unfortunately continue to go through at this point in our country. And it's important to remember, and I know this, you don't need reminding of this, but it is a tough place to start, right? We know that nearly every small business had to close last year, and those of you who are managing Main Streets and working with the small businesses in your community, I'm sure you were on the front lines of just trying to help them survive. We also know that millions and millions of people filed for unemployment last year as things were closed, and that millions are leaving their jobs this year because they understand that there are potentially different options, including millions who are starting their own business as well. Before COVID, though, we had a lot of changes already taking place in our communities. The vast majority of all of our counties were already seeing a decline in working age population, right? This can be because of the youth, sort of what we call the brain drain of younger adults leaving to find better opportunity. It can be also from the aging of our populations, but this has a significant impact on the local economy and at what we're seeing in Main Streets as well. And then on top of that, we had the greatest income inequality ever recorded in our country's history, right? And this is before the pandemic hit all of us. I can only imagine it's worse at this point. And then you fold that in with the kinds of issues that you probably pay attention to on a day-to-day basis of the impact of a vacant property, not only on the neighboring storefronts, but really on your entire main street and your downtown, its impact on property values, its impact on sales revenue, and how it impacts the potentially a lack of foot traffic as well when we have a significant number of vacancies. So not to be doom and gloom, but it's really, to me, about acknowledging that we are in fact at this transformational moment where we can build a stronger and more inclusive business community in our downtown and on our main street and build a strong economy at the same time. We know what it takes to be successful. We know that it means it's having a downtown that brings people together, a main street that does that, a place where people feel included and part of the success, a place that looks and feels cared for, and that people want to be a part of that success. It's really not rocket science, but it does take a lot of details, and you guys know that. Some of my details are really sort of my origin. On the left, you can see this amazing dress that my mother sewed for me when I was in high school. She sewed, she knit, she quilted, she painted, and she baked. She taught us how to use a drill, how to fix things, and an appreciation for those skills that we all had a responsibility to have. On the right, you can see it when I had the opportunity to give a TEDx talk entitled "The Economic Power of Great Places." So great places and creating great places for everybody has always been a core part of my work. The other core part of my work is these great teens, so I also get to teach how to use tools and get to have a lot of fun with. But my main focus outside of the teen world these days is Recast City, and that is an opportunity I have to work with local governments and real estate developers and other local leaders to bring small-scale manufacturing businesses onto Main Street, into downtowns, and into our economic development strategies, all acknowledging that it's best to do around a table, but for these days, we'll still do it mostly online like this. But the focus is really about how are we looking at our economic development in a different way, because we're in fact stuck in a default model in a lot of communities. This may not be the case in your community, but unfortunately it is still true in too many places. And what I want to talk about before we dive into the details of small scale manufacturing is just a little bit about what we need to do differently. So the default model that a lot of places have been pursuing and many places are still pursuing is really based on these three main pieces, right? We have an economic development model really left over from the 70s or 80s. A lot of places are being left behind because so a few places are chasing big business or big tech as the only solution. And that also, once we have a developer who figures out how to build one thing, they keep building the same thing and we keep allowing it because we're so hungry for anything, but we're not creating places that hold their value. And this default model is really assuming a one-size-fits-all for all of our communities, which is just not the case. So, I mean, as much as I love the 80s hair bands, it's really unfortunate that our economic development strategy is stuck in this, where we're really about chasing it, places. What this means is that places are really being left behind. And we know that this happened when larger manufacturing left a lot of our communities over the last 20, 30, 40 years. We know that there are neighborhoods that were redlined. We've historically excluded different populations from being able to benefit from not only mortgages and loans, but also buying commercial property or getting a small business loan. We have a whole history of different ways that we've left behind rural communities, small towns and small cities, and individual neighborhoods in our urban areas as well. One of the products of this is that we've created and in many ways has perpetuated a racial wealth gap in our community, where white households have at least 6.5 times, some estimates say up to 10 times the wealth of Black households. And it's not just because of unequal income, it is because of unequal incomes now and not just because of historic injustices. And so one of the things that I always work to look at is how are we creating better paying job opportunities for more people in our community? And that has to do with our national income inequality as well. And then as we're looking at not only redevelopment, which I know in historic preservation is going to be a main piece, but also adding on to our development, how are we making sure that it's something special, that it doesn't look like everywhere else, and that it'll hold its value. Because in many cases, we in fact spread retail, like expensive peanut butter, all over the place, big box stores out at the highway, malls, and pulled, as you guys know, pulled all of this energy away from our main streets and downtown, even though we know that people are looking for places to be. And really it comes down to figuring out a way to invest better. And there's a secret sauce to all of this. I'll admit it's not really that secret, and you guys probably know these pieces already, but I want to make sure we're all clear on them. One is that place is key to economic strength, and you guys probably know this better than most. Your main street, your downtown, having that place where people can come together is really essential for your economic strength, that identity of the place. The other piece is that it needs to be unique to hold its economic longevity. If it has the same stores, the same chains as everybody else, it's really easy to jump to the next place, ignore what's there, doesn't stand out in any way. But when we have unique storefronts, unique businesses, you can't just replicate it in the next town over. And so that really helps us build that economic longevity. And then social connections between our business owners become, in fact, essential for economic resilience. This is originally out of studies out of New Orleans after Katrina, and found that business owners that had strong social connections to other business owners were twice as likely to be able to survive the catastrophe. And this time where we almost need to think about how are we disaster-proofing Main Street, these kinds of social connections are actually a big part of what we need to be looking at. And yes, Main Street and small-scale manufacturing help us get there. The whole piece, though, as we move forward, that I think we need to recognize is that we need to act with intention and purpose, because it's not just, to me at least, it's not just about filling storefronts, it's about who gets access to those storefronts. What are we trying to achieve by filling those storefronts? And that when we really think about investing in the people who live in that community, in the place with those people, and then think about a new structure to support it all, we can take action now while building for bigger, long-term, harder things that might be needed in the community. This is all where small-scale manufacturing starts fitting into the picture. I call them the hidden gem, the missing piece. Small-scale manufacturing businesses are any business that creates a tangible product that you can replicate or package. I have two different shorthands for it this way. These days, you can pick your favorite. I call it hot sauce, handbags, or hardware, or you can talk about it as artisans to advanced manufacturing, right? It's everything in between. It's every product being made in the food. It's all different size businesses. They could be home-based. They could be leasing large spaces. But these are, when we're talking about small-scale manufacturing, in a smaller city or town, generally talking about up to 20 employees, in a larger city, maybe up to 50. But it's really about these businesses that can fit into the fabric of our main street, into the fabric of our downtown, and provide all of these different benefits, right? When we think about the benefits that they can provide, they give us a reason to gather. The vendors who are selling their products at our festivals, at our fairs, at our holiday markets, these are people who are creating products in our community, and that people come out because they want to see what's unique. They want to see what's different. They want to be proud of the people in their community who are selling products. We also have an opportunity to build a more inclusive community of business owners, because there are people who make products in every single different part of our demographics. And so with a need, just a dire need to make sure that we're benefiting our Black business owners, our Latino business owners, and other business owners of color, we need to be able to build this very inclusive, very purposeful community of business owners, so that we can make sure we're thinking about who should benefit from this work as we fill storefronts, as we create business development support, as we create more capital programs. These businesses can also fill our Main Street storefronts, or the ones a few blocks away, depending on the size of your Main Street. They can sell their product in the storefront, but they can also produce their product there. Most of these businesses are what I call modern manufacturing. They're clean, they're quiet, they're great neighbors, because you can look in the window and see something being made, which becomes an amenity. It draws people out. The other great thing about these businesses and storefronts is that they're not solely dependent on that foot traffic, because they're most likely selling not only in store, but online or wholesale. So they have multiple sources of revenue coming into that storefront. And when they're filling our vacant properties, they can help increase property values nearby. Zeke's is a great example. It's a coffee shop up front. They have a coffee roaster in the back. Wholesale distribution goes out the back door. And it, by filling in this storefront, helped draw more foot traffic to this block, which then help to fill other vacant storefronts on this block as well. And then lo and behold, if we're taking care of our small scale manufacturers and other small business owners in our community, we attract more business owners. And I think I forgot to say in the middle of all of this, small scale manufacturing business owners, these businesses generally are paying wages 50 to 100% more than retailer service jobs. So when we're really thinking about how do we attract and build the kinds of businesses we know that we need in our community to create more wealth building opportunities in our community, this is one essential way to get there. So yes, all of these to me are pieces of a thriving Main Street. Let me talk just briefly about who they are. So they come in all different shapes and sizes. Artisans or maker businesses or crafts people are sort of the smallest of the scale. This might be a one-person business up to maybe a 5-person business. A lot of times these businesses will thrive either at home originally or in a micro retail space, maybe 500 or 700 square feet. These businesses are using a lot of hand tools, but also small machinery. They can sell in person, they can sell direct to customers online, and might be doing a small amount of wholesale. So that diversity of revenue sources is really essential for not only the viability, but the resilience of these businesses as well. Then we have folks that are doing prototyping or small batch food production. They might need a few thousand square feet of space. They might have a small storefront, but really most of their space is dedicated to production. Or maybe they're a few blocks off of Main Street and they don't have a retail element, but they are creating and holding good paying jobs in downtown. And these might be 10 or 20 person businesses. And then we have those that are production scale. This is actually a picture in Cincinnati from Rheingeist Brewing from a number of years ago now. This is pre-pandemic, where they understood that their space is not just for brewing, but as a community gathering space. And we're seeing much more of this mix of production and community gathering space and retail all mashed up. And so we really have to think about how we're making sure there are no barriers to that kind of mashup within our buildings as well. Then we have different kinds of shared spaces. So we have a maker space, which is a very specific kind of space that's open to the public. And is mostly focused on education. It allows people to learn how to use a tool, take a class, have a membership, and use a whole bunch of different kinds of tools from a CNC router to 3D printing or a sewing machine. There's all different kinds of maker spaces. And these are wonderful, particularly for community engagement and outreach. Some larger maker spaces also have space for small businesses to have a table, have a booth, or even have a small office space. Like a co-work space, but mostly maker spaces are focused on community education and outreach. Then we have shared spaces that are specific to different business sectors. Commercial shared kitchen is one that you might be most familiar with, where individual food product businesses can come in, pay for access to a part of the commercial kitchen for a certain number of hours, and create their product and then put the rest of their stuff back in storage or take it with them. But it means that they have a commercial kitchen with a health stamp of approval so that they can scale their business before they maybe can afford to build out their own commercial kitchen space. These have been incredibly effective in helping grow locally owned businesses, but we have shared spaces also in wood shops, in textiles, in 3D printing, in welding. There's all different kinds of shared spaces that are out there now that are open specifically to small business owners, not open to the public, not focused on particularly just on education, but it is about helping small scale manufacturers of different specific product areas scale their business. So what does all of this mean for local economy? I'm going to walk you through one example from Columbia, Missouri. So the Loop, which is a community improvement district, it's just like a business improvement district, it's just not downtown. Said, we think small scale manufacturing can be a part of the future of this area. It's been rezoned for mixed use, but we don't know what we want to be or how we're going to get there. And this area is sort of a corridor smack between a light industrial area to the north that does a ton of fabrication and a residential area to the south. We engage the community, particularly looking at small scale manufacturing business owners, property owners on that corridor, but also people in the community that are providing support to the small businesses, their economic development authority, to engage them. And this is the Recast City method, which is this sort of deep engagement with these community members. And one of the things we specifically do is go out and interview the small scale manufacturing business owners all over the city to understand what works for them about being in that community and what's challenging about it, and really what do they need to be most successful. Because the solution isn't just about having a storefront for them, it is also about small business development support and about the capital that they might need and sort of all the other pieces to create a strong pipeline of growing businesses within the community. And one of the things that was most interesting to me about working on this project was how much they realized that small scale manufacturers were really this hidden economic engine already in the community. And it was more about tapping into this economic engine and giving them a place to come together than it was about building this part of the economy. So one of the first steps that they did is really an action that they took, and it was about opening a commercial shared kitchen, because we identified a whole bunch of need for commercial shared kitchen space, specifically with Black and Latino women in the community who had businesses in their homes, in their home kitchens, but were sort of bursting at the seams or wanted to become more formal in how they packaged and created products with their food. And that launched during the pandemic, which was really amazing. The other thing that they could act on within the last couple of years was, in fact, to go back to this new mixed-use zoning that they had and amend it so that they could add an artisan industry land use definition to their existing zone, so there wouldn't be a zoning barrier. Now, zoning is only one of the many barriers we often find. You also have to get it through a permitting process, and you have to make sure health and fire and safety can permit all of these different pieces, so you have to get into the detail. But these are their first two big steps. They also have integrated the producers into all of the branding for the whole corridor, into the events that they host, into the way that they talk about the area, and they've seen this just amazing outpouring of small scale manufacturing businesses that want to be involved and want to grow on that corridor because of it. And it's a first step in creating also space opportunities. So what does it mean to make something happen in all of this? Well, the first thing that you can do, and Joyce was talking about being able to raffle off some copies of my book, which is super exciting to me. But you can also get the first chapter for free if you're interested at recastyourcity.com. This is the bright yellow shiny cover of my book. It's really exciting to get to see. It just came out at the end of June, so it's still really new out there in the world. And I hope you will check it out and get that first chapter if you're interested. But there are things that you can take on even now. And it really, to me, is about creating these great places, but also not only saving our small businesses, but helping them grow. So there are 5 different things that I can talk to you about. One is we need to create affordable space for a diversity of small businesses. This is both a diversity of the business type, but also of who the owners are within our community. Really looking at the demographics and saying, does Main Street reflect the demographic diversity of our community? And if it doesn't, why not? And what can we do about it? There are so many different federal and state and local policies that have impacted how we invest in space and who has had that opportunity, that I think we're at a time where we really need to think about who can benefit from it now and the investments that we make moving forward to make sure that we're fixing some of the wrongs, as many of the wrongs of the past as we can. And so really thinking about how are we helping to finance maybe vacant buildings on our storefront to create space? What's the role of the local government in making that happen? How are we working with property owners to create these kinds of micro retail spaces that might be more affordable and more useful to our small scale manufacturing business owners? And really, how are we thinking about the spaces that might be available or coming available soon, and really doing the outreach to find small scale manufacturing business owners and bring them into our Main Street and our downtown. The second thing to think about is filling the gap in assistance with local initiatives. So thinking about what kind of small business assistance is out there. Is it in all the different languages that might be represented in your community? Did you reach out yet to faith organizations, neighborhood leaders, cultural groups to share information? I know a lot of you did a ton of this during the pandemic. I know our Main Street leaders and our community leaders really dove into the deep end on this during the pandemic, but really thinking about now where your gaps might still be, and thinking about what kind of grants you can provide to existing small business service providers, especially those who are focusing on business owners of color, women, and immigrant populations within our community, to make sure that we're helping them be strong businesses. The third thing we can think about is tapping local anchors. And our local anchors might be another big business in the community. It could be the local government, a school system, a hospital system, right? It's anybody who's got a large set of things that they're buying. There are some programs within our local anchors that have commitments to buying X number of dollars or procuring X number of dollars within the community or the region. A lot of times they start with services that they're buying because they think it's a little bit easier. But we can also have local anchors make commitments to procure products, physical products within the locality or the region, or create new partnerships where the business can create a product that they need. A lot of times this only is going to successfully start through one-on-one matchmaking, sitting down with the anchor, understanding what are some of the products that they're buying, what are the specifications of what they need in terms of those products, and then going out and finding the businesses that could be able to do it and making the introductions. So much of this is about trust and about relationships, as you well know. And it really takes that kind of detailed level of relationship building to bring the anchors and their spending into the community. Fourth is really, as maybe not a surprise, it is about the policies. That does mean zoning and permitting, but any other policies that might be in place that could either support small-scale manufacturing growth in the community or prevent it from happening, and what might be in the way. Can we make it really easy and predictable for them to get through a permitting process because we know we want them downtown? What are the policies in place in terms of rehab of our historic structures? Do we have a rehab building code for existing structures to make it easier for rehab to happen? There's lots of different policies we sometimes need to look at. And it could be something like the economic development, the comprehensive economic development strategy of the community. Is this even mentioned? Is it part of what we're trying to build? Who sees the policy responsibility around small businesses in the community? And is that a clear responsibility within the local government and its different authorities? And then the last step is really thinking about how we build community pride. And yes, as Main Street and as community leaders, it is about the events, but it's also about the branding, and it's also about the way we talk about it. One of the reasons that when I work with communities, I always insist that we go to the small scale manufacturer's space of production if they're not at home, if they lease a space, is because you would not believe how proud these business owners are when somebody from the local government shows up to say, hey, I want to learn about what you do and I want to understand how we better support you, because nobody has ever paid attention to these small scale manufacturing businesses before. And they are so excited to see what they can do to support and the community and really be a part of its growth. So I hope everybody's ready to jump into the deep end with me on this now. You can definitely get that free chapter from recastyourcity.com. I also invite you to come join me on LinkedIn. It is where I share all of the best practices that I see popping up in different parts of the country, real estate models, business development programming, capital programs that are out there that different jurisdictions are creating every day right now. And that's where I see them and where I share them. But to me, this is really all about what kind of action we can take for Main Street, because as you guys know, there is so much need out there. We are in just so many different ways we need to support these businesses that are there now, but also the next round of businesses that will be on Main Street, and creating more opportunity for more people as part of our outcomes. Because to me, it really is about creating these places that people want to come together, that make people really proud of being a part of it, but also proud of the businesses that they're creating in the community and the jobs, the good paying jobs that they're creating in our community as well. And how do we showcase them and tell their stories and really bring them into the forefront of our storefronts and our community, and the leadership that it takes to be able to do that within the community as well. So to me, it really is all about how we make great places that people are proud to call home. And with that, I will tell you, oh, right. So there is still the free chapter, the LinkedIn, my email, if you want to reach out to me directly, is always available. And if you're interested, if you don't win the raffle and you're interested in buying the book, you can use this code to get a discount on it as well. And with that, I will stop. I will move to a different screen, maybe. I don't know where to land. Joyce, you want to do questions?
Yes, we're ready for folks to both in the, please write your questions in the question box. Please go to the chat box if you want to be in the contest for one of the 9 books. And we will wait here for a moment for you to type in questions.
Oh, I love that they
We
can
do
input
have
in.
several of our communities have maker spaces, and it really kind of varies. I think it takes time for people get used to having that resource there, that they aren't, immediate maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important to think about is really how does this all factor into the work you're doing already? I mean, I know every community leader right now is so strapped for hours. That's an understatement. And really thinking about engaging these small scale manufacturers and really going out and talking to them. There's a wonderful downtown Main Street program in Michigan that we're working with right now. And, they're finding that there are small scale manufacturers even hidden in their downtown already that they never really understood were there. And that the diversity of revenue sources coming into that business space really is part of why they've been able to last for so long in that location. And so it's really been helping them be able to go out and find more of these businesses, not only in their town, but in their region, for potential future tenants on Main Street as well.
Okay, we had several questions come in here all at once, and we'll get to all of them. How does the approach change for small rural communities versus large ones or suburban?
Absolutely. So this works just as well in small rural communities. If anything, sometimes it's a little bit harder to get people out of their garage or shed that they're doing their production in. I did a project in Alabama in a small town of about 5,000 people. We've done one in Michigan in a town of about 2,000 people. People make stuff. They're just sort of hidden away in their homes and in their sheds. And the question really is always, what are you trying to achieve? Is it about filling the storefronts on your small Main Street? Is it about building up those people's businesses wherever they are? Could be a combination of the two, and really thinking about who should benefit from this work that you're going to do. A lot of times, this isn't just true of rural communities, but it seems to come up almost more often in rural communities that people sort of come up with an idea and maybe haven't done the whole business plan and really figured out what the expenses for their supplies are going to be like versus what they're going to charge, and really might not be pricing their product. This is true universally. Might not be pricing their product for longer term sales because it's not the way they're thinking about it. So there truly is a need to get people savvy quickly about what it means to sell these products for profit, and really understanding what it means to price things correctly, not just to sell them within your community, but the whole e-commerce side of it. Because one of the things that I think is most exciting about this for rural communities is that small scale manufacturing is an ability to have a business there in the community, but be bringing revenues in from people outside of the community. And that is an amazing way to help people build wealth that's not dependent on the incomes of their neighbors. And I think is a really exciting opportunity there. I think these businesses do better when they're surrounded by some of their other small scale manufacturers. So they might be sort of tucked away in different suburban areas, but when we have neighborhood Main Streets or rural Main Streets in smaller towns and cities, and I think that that's going to be a better kind of place, and it could be a neighborhood Main Street in a big city as well. But it's really thinking about how are we bringing different people together in that space.
Okay, the next question. How do you target businesses downtown with the potential to become small-scale manufacturers? What characteristics or rubrics can be used to target businesses ready for expansion? I know several businesses create for their own customers, but might be ready to expand more into the small-scale manufacturing realm.
It's a great question. And the answer is talking to the individual business owners, right? First, we have to understand, do they want to scale? Are they interested in that? Do they want to grow from where they are? Not everybody does, and that's an important thing to understand. And a lot of people do. Then the other piece to understand is, what have they figured out what they can afford, or what would it take for them to get to that scaled ability to be able to afford it? What's the barrier? Is it a short-term issue? Sometimes a lot of businesses I spoke to, they want a bigger space, but they can't afford it yet because they have a machine that only produces at X quantity. And to afford a bigger space, they need the machine that produces at Y quantity, but they can only put the larger machine in the larger space. right? So that's really a role for some sort of loan, maybe a 5-year loan from a local or regional loan fund that can help them make that transition. So we have to understand really in detail what is their barrier. Do they need a coach or a mentor that helps them make sure that their pricing is correct, that their distribution is as strong as it could be? There's some wonderful business programming out of a business in Chicago called 37 Oaks that has a program called 37 Oaks University that's all about pricing and e-commerce and distribution, because so many of these product businesses don't have the expertise on all of that when they start, and they have to learn it. So, and then the other side of it is talking to property owners, understanding what size spaces you have, what's the pricing of those spaces. There's great examples out of Ithaca, New York, of a new developer, a new property owner in the city creating micro retail storefront spaces that are flat fee and they're 150 square feet or 300 square feet. And what it meant is that business owners could start in these really micro spaces and get a following and build up their revenues and figure out all of the nuts and bolts of their business, and then move into a larger space that same property owner might own or somewhere else in the community. And so the role of these micro retail spaces becomes really important to quite literally grow your own or incubate your own businesses that can be scalable. And part of our job is to figure out, can we help create them? Is there special financing we need? Can we help negotiate a shared lease so that 2 or 3 or 4 of these small scale manufacturers could share an existing storefront if they can't afford it themselves? So it's all of those kinds of details that we look at.
Great. Next question. What are some of the more unusual uses you've seen? It seems like everyone has an hourly kitchen or is planning one.
Yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of storefronts that are doing textiles or jewelry. Main Street might not have large woodworking, but might have smaller wood or furniture rehab going on. And then food products, right? Food products are everywhere. I think that there's a limited distance that most people are willing to drive for most of the commercial shared kitchens. And so it takes a while before a market is oversaturated with something like that. Similarly with maker spaces for the sake of growing these businesses, or a shared space like a wood shop. So, I think as long as there's a clear mission and you understand who your customer is, and you're building the partnerships that you need in place to really build that pipeline of people who are going to come to your space, there's definitely a lot of different things. I mean, I think one of the more interesting spaces I've seen is mostly welding and 3D printing, and it's only for businesses, but it also has some co-work space of people who are more or less working more in those kinds of tools, which has been very interesting, but really hard to make the numbers work, and they did. But some of my favorites are finding the chocolate producer in a storefront, so you can go in, buy the chocolate, peek in the production space and see them being made, or be able to look at it through a glass wall. Those are phenomenal draws. And the thing that I think a lot of people get hung up is, well, if the town nearby has a chocolate shop and we have a chocolate shop, well, what's different? And the truth is that each store, doesn't matter if it's the candle making shop or the chocolate shop or an advanced manufacturing space, they each have their own story, they each have their own clients, they each have their own reason for being there. And the more that we can help them really dive into what makes them unique, the more each of these places will stand out.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do you have any stats on what the need is for micro commercial spaces in the average downtown?
No, I don't. One of the challenges with small scale manufacturing is that there's no ready sitting there database. In every community, we work with community leaders to build a list of small scale manufacturing businesses in the community, and then to understand their needs. And only based on that can we even begin to understand sort of what is the average space needs that they have. So I can't really you can't really walk into any community and say, oh, there's definitely a need for 10, 20, 30 micro retail spaces. I can tell you that anywhere that I know of that has micro retail space, it doesn't matter if it's 5 spaces or 20 spaces in many different size places, there is always more demand for 500 square foot or 700 square foot space. There's always more demand for these spaces. So creating the first set of them is definitely, to me, very low risk, as long as you're building the relationships and the partnerships to find them, or the community is helping to do that. Does it max out at some point? Probably, but I haven't found anywhere that has the threat of that yet.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Our downtown's first floor spaces are almost 100% occupied, but we have quite a few empty basements and upper floors. Are those two types of spaces possible for these uses? Do you know of any examples? How can building owners market these basement and upper floor spaces to small scale manufacturers to get those spaces filled in a way that will contribute to the comprehensive downtown revitalization?
Well, that's a great question. So if you want to look at businesses that are going to be upstairs or in the basement, it's probably not going to be anybody who wants to be focused on retail, right? Because we know for the most part that unless you're in the main floor storefront, your visibility and the access to customers is just much lower. At least in most places, that's the case. And so upstairs could be great for residential. I highly recommend residential over in your main street, but also being able to, depending on the structure also and what kind of equipment you can house upstairs, that kind of natural light on a second floor could be very attractive to a producer. There's one community outside of Indianapolis that I can't remember the name of the town that I went to for a project where there's a woman who she works in textiles. She's a fashion designer, and we went to visit her, and she was in the second floor on the town square with these huge glass windows, bringing in all of this natural light that was amazing. She did all of her fashion production on that second floor, and it was in a good location so that when she had clients who wanted to come meet her, they could come find her. But she wasn't looking at foot traffic as part of her client base. So it's a little bit of a different kind of business, but I think is a great opportunity. Basements, totally going to be dependent on what it's like. With no natural light, I think it's a little bit harder to sell. I've seen a lot of maker spaces start in basements, but if it's a smaller, main street sets of buildings where the basements are really quite small footprint, that might be harder to use. But the second floor, I think, could be a great opportunity.
Thank you. And I'll just add, every town used to have a shoe repair in the basement, a little one tucked around there. So I think if you don't have a shoe repair, Adrian, look at that. While I wait for more questions to come in, please type your questions in if you're curious about something. I wanted to ask about the anchors and the production, which is very interesting. Do you have any examples first? And then the thing that I was imagining, as you had mentioned that, we keep hearing about hospitals and their need for 3D printing for different medical devices that are coming online and stuff. Is that something that you've seen created on a small scale?
No, but that's a fascinating idea. Look, on the anchor side, there's a couple different pieces of this. One is there's some really interesting distributed production models that are growing nationally. There's an interesting company called Xometry, it starts with an X, that just went public a couple months ago, and they're valued because they create an on-demand pricing for 3D elements. Which usually used to take weeks at a time to do. So they have dynamic pricing for a widget that's created through additive or subtractive manufacturing for NASA or a Department of Defense contractor or the aviation, industry. These with super high specifications. And the other part of what they have done is that they have built a partnership with over 500 different small businesses, production businesses across the country who are up to their standards. And so they can have producers in any big or small town across the country be producing these elements. And so they're not producing them themselves, they're actually this distributed production network, which is a way to not necessarily work with the anchors in your community like you asked about, but be part of this national and in fact now international network of producing these parts. And I think is a great way to really sort of have another source of revenue coming into a machine shop or an additive manufacturing space that might be there in the community. The thing to think about with the anchors, and this is something that, so I'm based in Washington, D.C., and had a fascinating conversation with somebody from the D.C. government, because D.C. already has an anchor program to work with a couple of the anchor institutions in the city to procure services locally. And they're just moving on to getting some of these anchors to buy some of their products. And the thing that they realized is that they needed to do it, like I was describing, one-on-one. So to work with one anchor on, here's a couple of different things that they imagine that they could buy in the region, and then going out and finding the producers and really almost doing a reverse marketing within the community, understanding how to not only find the product, but build the relationships with that procurement officer within the anchor. So it's a lot of detailed work on that front.
Yeah, well, thank you. Please write in any more of your questions. I mean, I think if you were to sit down in your community and really brainstorm, I think you're right, Ilana, that these people are kind of secrets in their garages or something like that, and we just don't think of them if they're out of sight, out of mind. But Christie's on Marietta has the cutest print shop downtown. That's not something you'd have in every downtown,
Right.
producing artisan posters. But I think all of us, if we actually just brainstormed these ideas. Here's another question that came in. How do you control the type of businesses so it isn't too intrusive to neighboring properties?
Well, I mean, that's what the zoning still requires, that, right? So any land use definition we're going to add for artisan manufacturing or artisan industry is generally going to have some language in it that says, will not be noisier or produce, any greater fumes than something already allowed in that district. Bizarrely, this comes up in districts that might allow like a dog kennel, which I think is one of the noisiest uses we have in some of these districts. But we have to look at what it is. A lot of times, any kind of ventilation requirements are going to start making those spaces too expensive for somebody who might have major fumes or noises. And so it sort of filters out itself. And then the other thing is really proactively going after the businesses you think could be great additions, and helping make the introductions with the property owners and being proactive about building up opportunity for the small scale manufacturers. Something that I've seen in some great communities is where they have an area that they're trying to fill. Maybe they have service businesses there, but they really want to, over time, help those property owners switch to more retail frontage uses as part of what's going on, is they start holding a maker's market or more events with vendors from product businesses in that specific area. And so not only are they getting the vendors familiar with that area, but they're ultimately getting the property owners familiar with the vendors too, and end up being able to do this matchmaking over time as well, which is really exciting. Joyce, are you there?
Yes, I sure am. I'm
Okay.
waiting for more questions to come in.
Okay, I just didn't know if I where I was on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to think about where to find these businesses, right? I mean, that's actually step 2 in the 5 steps in the book. Step 1 is being really clear on the outcomes you want to achieve and who should benefit from those investments that are made to achieve those outcomes, and being really specific about those. And then the second is all about how do you find small scale manufacturers in your community. And to your point before, it's, you start thinking about who you already know in the community, and asking around and paying attention in a different way. And the funniest thing to me is every time we start working with we work with groups of communities at a time through our Recast Leaders Cohort program. And every time we start down this road of, well, here are the steps to go start finding small scale manufacturers, they come back 2 weeks later and they're like, I never realized that, we know all of these different businesses around town and they actually make stuff, and I really never thought about them that way. And then I started asking my friends, and they added another 10 businesses to my list. And it's just sort of hidden in plain sight in the funniest way to me, that these businesses are there, but we've never really thought about them in this specialized way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we're always talking about the mix of retail, services, government, but including industry, whether it's small scale or even a little bit larger scale that is in your downtown, not to ignore what you have at your own back door.
Right. Very true.
All right, I'm going to assume you can still write some questions while I'm giving some closing comments. Please enter for the book contest if you haven't already. Thank you all for joining us today. We will be hosting our first in-person revitalization training in Wellington next Wednesday, September 22nd. The topic is design and it will be held outdoors. We have 6 contractors presenting on caring for historic building elements, windows, plaster, carpentry, roofs, etc., metals. And then Heritage Ohio will be hosting a hybrid annual conference in Springfield, October 18th through 20th. You can always check our website and visit our calendar of events where they're posted. So thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you in the coming weeks. Thank you, Ilana.
My pleasure.
Oh, Ilana, I have one more question.
Sure, I'm here.
Are there any special considerations, accommodations for traffic, vans, trucks servicing the businesses?
No different than any of your other things. I mean, it's not going to be any different than a restaurant. If it's a food product business, most of these businesses are operating off of van delivery or Amazon or some other delivery that you'd have along that corridor anyway. The folks that would need an 18-wheeler, you're probably not going to want on Main Street. But those businesses are probably not going to fit into your Main Street storefronts anyway. So it's generally what you're going to have coming through anyway.
Great, thank you for adding that. All right, folks, so thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.